Uh, hey, Jim. Superphiz here, recording with Jim McDonald. I had some questions about slashing. I tried to keep up with it in the beginning. I got behind, and I see a lot of questions in the community now about how slashing works. And so my goal is to distill information so that it can be consumed in bite-sized chunks. And I hoped that you would help me work through it in maybe just a little bit longer form, and then either we'll have a bite-sized product or I might condense it into a bite-sized product later to make it more consumable. Does that sound fair to you?
That sounds great.
So, tell me about slashing.
Okay, so probably the first thing to know about slashing is that it is not losing money through not voting. So a lot of people think that any time that you lose money, you are being slashed. That is not correct. You can lose money by not attesting, not proposing, if your computer is offline, if you have a network issue, all of those things. However, that's just a penalty. So that is just when you don't do what you're meant to do, you get a little bit dinged as a result, but everyone moves on, everyone's happy. Slashing is a very specific thing. Slashing is when you cheat, as far as the network is concerned. So as far as the network is concerned, it will say, okay, you've done something that could potentially damage the Ethereum 2 beacon chain. And if you do that, because of the potential impact of that, there is a much higher penalty, and that is slashing.
Okay. And so that is in contrast to leakage. Now, this might be a silly question. I have seen leakage referred to as both leakage and quadratic leakage, but all leakage is quadratic leakage. It's just that it doesn't really scale to those quadratic proportions until a lot of validators are offline. Is that accurate?
So the rewards and penalties system is probably the single most confusing and complex part of the entire system, which is saying something when you consider that we were meant to be building a consensus engine, and this is kind of the piece that goes there. So if you do not attest for a given slot, so you're meant to attest to a block, you don't do so, at that point in time, you will be given a penalty that is roughly equivalent to what you would have got if you had attested perfectly. So that is something where, because of the nature of that loss over time, it will decrease because your balance goes down. So the money you would have gained goes down. As a result of that, your penalty goes down. So that is not actually quadratic. That is actually called sublinear. So if you start up a validator and never attest to it, you will start off losing a certain amount of ether every 6 minutes. A week later, you'll still be losing ether, but at a lower rate. So you're not going to actually have, an increasing or quadratic penalty. The quadratic penalty is something that's specific to what's called the inactivity leak. So the inactivity leak actually occurs when fewer than 2/3 of the validators attest to when fewer than 2/3 of the validators attest to a particular epoch. So an epoch, 6.5 minutes, and that epoch inside one epoch, every single active validator will or is meant to attest. So if you're in that space and you don't attest, then you'll have a penalty. If more than 1/3 of the validators don't attest, though, we're in a different situation. And in that situation, what happens is we're now in a world where
give me just 1 second. This is so important, and I love the guy. I just 1 second. All right, and we're back on.
Cool. So there's a difference between a normal leak for someone who doesn't do what they should do, which is known as a penalty, and the quadratic leak, which is something that occurs when a large percentage of validators don't do what they should. So if we have a quick look at a normal validator, a validator by itself is due to attest once every what's called an epoch, 6.5 minutes roughly. If it doesn't do what it's meant to do, if it doesn't attest when it's meant to, it will be penalized. It will be penalized approximately the same amount that it would have been rewarded if it had done the work. Due to the nature of rewards and penalties in Ethereum 2, though, the amount of reward or penalty is related to the balance of the validator. So if you started a new validator up and you never bothered attesting with it, then as soon as it starts, it's meant to attest, it doesn't. As a result of that, you will have a penalty applied. A week later, you're meant to be attesting, you're not, you will have another penalty applied, but that second penalty then will be smaller because your balance is less. So over time, the amount that you are penalized for not validating, if it's over a long period of time, actually decreases. This, though, is purely for an individual validator. There's a situation called the inactivity leak or the quadratic leak. And this is a different beast. So if more than 1/3 of all of the active validators do not attest, we're in a different situation. The chain actually cannot finalize. So we need enough votes on the chain to come to agreement. If we don't get that, and we don't get that continually, the chain itself is in trouble. So we're not finalizing. Nothing written to the chain can actually be guaranteed to be final until we come back to this point where 2/3 of the validators are voting. There's nothing the chain itself can do to convince people to vote. It can't send them emails or put out posts and say, hey, come and vote for me. What it can do is it can penalize the validators that are not voting to the point where they leave or they start again. They leave generally by having their balance reduced down to 16 ether, at which case they are ejected. And obviously they can start to come back and start attesting, because losing 16 ether in the current climate is what, $6,000, $7,000 or what else it might be. As a result of that, of course, we would fully expect people to want to come back on board. So the chain does what it can. The penalty for not attesting when the chain is not finalizing is the piece that is a quadratic leak. So you don't attest for the first epoch where you're meant to and the chain's in leak, you'll get a penalty. You do it again, you get 2 times a penalty. You do it again, you get 3 times the original penalty, etc., etc. So the actual increase is on the individual penalties is actually linear, again, slightly sublinear. But the overall impact, if you take it over a period of time, is quadratic. So if you're off for 1 week and you get a penalty of 1, if you're off for 2 weeks, it'll be 2, 3 weeks, it'll be 4, it'll be 8, it'll be 16. So the overall penalty does increase over time. Always worth remembering that what the chain is trying to do is protect itself. So it's ensuring that people are doing what they should be doing, and it's ensuring that it can finalize in whichever way it can make sure it can.
Awesome. Okay, so just to me trying to wrap my mind around this, you described a sublinear penalty and a quadratic leak. Are these, so these, if leakage is the class and these are 2 types of leakage, does that mean that they are codified in different algorithms, or is it a different expression of the same algorithm?
They are actually 2 separate things. So
okay.
The inactivity leak at current is a completely separate beast to having a single penalty for not attesting. And we see this, and one of the concerns that people have about Ethereum 2 in the inactivity leak. So with Medasha, we've had a couple of instances where we've been in the state where the chain is not finalized, and people are, or believe they are, attesting perfectly, and they're still losing funds. It's relatively minimal. We tracked this over the last period of inactivity, and during the time that an inactive validator lost 45–50% of its balance, the active validator lost about 1.5%. So it's not a huge amount, but it's still there, and obviously it's considered unfair. Again, we come back to the problem that the chain can't differentiate. So when at least 1/3 of validators are offline, theoretically, at least 1/3 of blocks aren't being produced either. As a result of that, and because of the state of randomness, you can have periods where 2, 3, 4 slots in a row don't have blocks they need to have. So if I attested and then there are 4 blocks that didn't turn up, my attestation has to go and fit into this 5th block that has got all the information from the past 4 slots to try and get in. Commonly, that means it either won't fit, and even if it does fit, I'm late. I should have done it 4 blocks ago. The fact the block wasn't present is neither here nor there. And again, the chain can't tell the difference. It can't tell if someone was sneakily not creating a block when they were meant to. They can't tell if I created my attestation when I said I did, or just held it back a bit to try and confuse the chain. As a result of that, I have to be penalized for the good of the network. So even though I'm trying to attest perfectly, because the network cannot work out our intentions, you'll be penalized a little bit during that quadratic leak period.
I love that this is finally sinking in for me. Like, it's you did attest, but your inclusion distance is so far behind that the reward or the yes, I think I understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're doing great. So I have this outline. I think that we covered a lot of it in the first one, and I understand now the big picture so much better than I did. So there are 3 types of slashings that are possible. They're listed as double proposal, surround vote, and double vote. And I think those are is pretty easy to understand. Is my basic understanding correct? That a double proposal is simply when you propose twice in one epoch, or well, you're assigned to a proposal slot randomly, and if you propose twice during that assigned slot, that would be a double vote.
Absolutely, right? And the reason behind that is pretty simple. So if it's my turn to propose a block, and I say to the world, okay, here's a block, and in this block, there's a transaction that says I sent Superphiz 10 Ether. You can see that, people will vote on that, it will try to become part of the chain. If I sneakily create a second block at the same time that doesn't include that transaction, I could potentially get you to do something because I've given you 10 Ether, you send me a monitor or whatever. And then I put the new block in place instead that doesn't have that transaction in. I am trying to not only cheat you, but I'm trying to fool the network. Mm-hmm. So when you do that, there is a danger that not only for anyone who is nefarious out there, I might have a bunch of guys who are willing to sign up to my second block and not my first one, but also just for the people out there who are trying to do the right thing in the chain. To see 2 blocks suddenly means they don't know which one they should attest to. Only one of them will ever make it into the chain if either of them do, but they are rewarded on attesting to the correct block. When there's only one block, that should be simple. When there's more than one block, there's not. So again, any attempt to create more than one block in the same slot has to be looked at by the network as a potential attack, and because of that, it's treated as a slashing event.
Okay, and so a double proposal seems like the most serious type of slashable event. Is it penalized more severely because of the type of because it's a double proposal, or is it simply?
No. So every slashing is treated the same way, and they're actually pretty much as serious as each other. Okay. So if we move on to, for example, one of the attestation slashings, which is, it's called a double vote, and again, the idea is you change your vote. So if we move away from blockchain for a minute and have a little think about what's going on here. Let's say we have 6 people in a room. They get to choose. They'll vote either red or they'll vote blue, and we just need a majority to carry on. Okay. So everyone signs a bit of paper saying if they vote red or blue. We have a look at the bits of paper. We had 4 votes for red and 2 votes for blue. We move on. If then after that, someone says, hey, hang on a minute, look, I've got these votes here, and I've now found 5 votes for blue, and there's still only 4 votes for red, then 2 things. One, we've suddenly changed the vote that we had. We thought we were voting red. We're now suddenly voted blue. But the second thing, and the really critical thing, is the only way that can happen, because we now have 9 total votes, the only way we can do that is if at least 3 people voted for both red and blue. Voting for red and blue, voting for 2 different blocks or similar, that's our double vote. When we say we're doing different things, we are voting twice. We are trying to confuse the network. Again, we could be doing it accidentally or similarly, but the network has to treat it as a malicious attack. As a result of that, we're like, okay, we can see there are 2 separate votes from the same person for 2 different things. That is a slashing event. So again, it is equally punished by the network in the same way.
Okay, and so if we look at, so slashing should never be an accidental kind of offense. Like, an honest person running their validator should never be slashed. But and that is fair. I know that. But with that said, there's the caveat of and I discovered this early on playing on Topaz, I think, where I left a machine on running validator keys. I thought it was off. I moved to a new machine, and for quite some time, I was running the same validator keys on two machines. What happened then?
Absolutely. So because of the nature of the blockchains that we have, and especially Ethereum 2, because these are peer-to-peer systems, there is no guarantee that any two systems will have the same completely up-to-date view of the network at any one time. One of the whole reasons we go through this whole loop of trying to build consensus, trying to gain finality, is that we can move away from the kind of bubbling miasma of these are all the things that could be, to actually this is now set in stone, this is absolutely the history of the chain, and we're happy and we move on. Because we can have each node having a very different view of what the blockchain looks like, then as you mentioned, when it comes time for you to, let's say, attest to the existing state of the chain, you can easily create two different attestations, because over on one side you might have received the latest block. On the other side, you haven't yet, because that computer is running a little bit slowly, or it has fewer connections, or it's just rebooted and is catching up. So there's all sorts of reasons why, in a completely normal operation, we would not expect any two nodes, certainly over time, to have the same view of the beacon chain. And if at that point in time, when you're asked to create an attestation, create a proposal, if you have different views from your counterpart that has the same keys, then you will create this situation where you appear to be voting for two different things, proposing two different blocks. And of course, as we said, the network still cannot differentiate between an honest mistake and an attack, and has to treat it as an attack, and you are slashed accordingly.
Okay, so and just to be clear, that is the only case that I'm aware of where, for example, a home user could potentially accidentally be slashed, and that is running the validator keys in two places. Is there another or anything else that is there any potential oops without modifying software that could lead an otherwise honest person who's trying to have redundancy to create a slashable event?
So, as you say, it's normally around this having redundancy idea. I need a hot backup. I need to ensure that if my primary computer explodes, I can recover myself in 30 seconds, whatever it might be. And there are variations of that. So you might have a computer at home and one away in an offsite data center. You might have a system that's designed to quickly restart in event of a failure, to move to a different beacon chain, and all of these kind of things. So it is still possible to slash yourself even if you only have one computer. So we give you a simple example. Let's say that you have a system that will validate against Prism. If there's a problem with Prism for some reason, you will quickly shut down Prism. You'll move all your keys over to Teku, and then you'll start Teku, and you'll come back up again. Well, in those type of situations, potentially, again, if you do that quickly enough, if you're so good that you can get the whole thing done within a few seconds, potentially you can actually cause a slashing event, because I can vote for a particular slot on Prism, then Prism stops, then I move over, I start up on Teku, and I can actually vote for the same slot on Teku. Again, potentially with a different kind of situation in terms of what my view of the beacon chain is, and as a result cause a slashing event. As you mentioned, it's not just backup either. The idea of moving from one computer to another computer, hey, I'm going to upgrade from my old laptop to my nice new shiny desktop that I've bought. I'm going to move the validated keys over, and again, you can potentially have problems there. There are now a few bits and pieces around that. One is that if you're going to shut down a computer, do it properly, and the best way of doing that is to move the validator keys, or move the passphrase to the validator store somewhere else. Okay, just do something so that if this thing does start up again, then it'll just fail again immediately, because like we said, it either can't find the validator key stores, or it can't decrypt them and carry on that way. So there's certainly that to do. The other thing to do is to give it a little bit of time. Now, this is anathema to a lot of ops guys. You know, everyone's focused on 5 nines uptime, and I want to be able to fail over within 30 seconds and all of this kind of stuff. Absolutely. You don't need to do that. As we mentioned, in Ethereum 2, your penalty will only be about the same as your reward. An epoch is about 6.5 minutes. So if you want to be completely safe, then one of the things you can do is you can shut one computer down. You can wait for 2 full epochs, because you could potentially be on the very edge of one where you were just about to attest, and the other one. So if you wait for 2 full epochs and you start up on the other side, you are very safe. The other thing that the Ethereum community has been working on, the development teams have been working quite hard on this, is something they call the slashing protection interchange format, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but fundamentally, when a validator signs a block, for example, it makes a note of it. It remembers that it signed that block. Now that's good, because say there was a problem with your local time, your clock or something, you might think you've gone back in time in 5 minutes and want to create this block again, because that's the time you're meant to do it at. You won't have that problem, because the database has a note to say, hey, I've already done something for this slot, I'm not going to do it again. If you can move that information along with the key stores as you move it around, then again, that provides a lot of protection. Now, it's relatively early days. The EIP is still in draft, and it has gone through a fair few revisions, but it's out there and it is working. And we expect the current version, which is version 5, to be available in all of the clients that are out there, all of the validator clients that are going to be running. I would say something that is really important, though, with all of these things is, you know what, take your time. You can miss a 0.00004 ether penalty. You know, you can miss that reward. You can miss half a day if you so desire. You know what, you're rushing around, it's late at night, you're tired, you think you fixed it all. My personal opinion would be, you know what, go to bed, don't start this up yet. Wake up the next morning, check it out. It's going to cost you, in reality, $10, $15, something like that. And that's okay, because slashing, as we said, is an attack on the network, and it's punished an awful lot more severely. You get a triple whammy, if you will, when you have an attack, when you have a slashing event, and they're just not worth it. So certainly the single best protection against slashing is care.
Awesome. Okay. And so I do not know if we mentioned that slashing also results in ejection from the network, and that will force you to miss out on future penalties, even if you were able to recover the loss through validating. You will miss out on future penalties, at least during phase 0.
Yeah, so this is this idea of the triple whammy. So if you are slashed, then you will have an immediate loss of ether. It's not a huge one. It's about, I think it's about 1% now. They changed it. So at the moment, it's about 1% of your balance. A little while later, there will be a second penalty, and that is totally not up to you. That depends on how many other people were slashed in and around you. So when you are slashed, there is a window of 36 days. And for the 18 days before that and the 18 days after that, for any other validator that has been slashed at the same time, you will lose additional funds. So if 1% of the entire network was slashed over that 36-day period, you'd lose an extra 1%. If 20% of the network was slashed, you'd lose an extra 20% of your funds. So you will lose a bunch of funds. There's actually also a separate bleed going on over that entire 36-day period where, as you mentioned, you're meant to be attesting, but not. So you're going to get punished by not, well, you may attest, but the network now ignores you. So you will be punished for not attesting, even if you try to. And then, as you mentioned, at the end of that period, when you finally are kicked out, your funds are sitting there stagnant, locked, until they can be withdrawn and made useful. So yeah, you kind of have 3 different penalties, if you will, by having this slashing event occur.
It's so great. I remember listening to that on a research call, and I just, at that time, it was so ambiguous and in the sky, and I had trouble understanding it. And now seeing it in reality in the network, it makes so much more sense. And just to be clear about the force exit. It is a big deal during phase 0, but it will be slashing will always be a big deal, and it will always be a rare event, but it will be less of an event in phase 2 because you will get your remaining funds back in a reasonable time and not the 2-year window.
Sure, at some stage we will have withdrawals available and or transfers available, and at that point in time, yes, once a validator has finished going through its exit procedure and moved from exited to withdrawable, at that stage, yes, you will be able to move your funds. As to if there will be costs involved with that, we don't know yet, because obviously the withdrawals mechanism has not been fully fleshed out. So yeah, we certainly believe at this stage that at the moment, once you've gone through that pain, that's the end of it. But you never know what surprises the devs may have up their sleeves for us afterwards. So certainly not being slashed is the best option.
Sure. Okay, great. And so the two other things I want to talk about, and I think maybe there are a few more. Okay, so let's talk about how much you get slashed. And you alluded to some of this. I'm aware of some kind of 1/32 of your hold, or is that now 1% of your hold? Or
yeah, so it was 1/32. It's gone down to a third of that.
Okay.
So when mainnet launches with the specs that are in the version 1.0 specifications, a number of the penalties have been reduced. So although and they have been reduced with a caveat that they will be increased again a few months down the line. I think they said 5 months, 6 months, something like that. They will return. So in the long term for slashing, if you are slashed, you will lose 3% of your funds. You will also have penalties ongoing for your 36 days. We'll come back to them. And then your percentage loss of your validator due to other validators also being slashed goes from nothing if no one else has been slashed up to 100% if a third of other validators have been slashed. The reason for that's pretty simple. You need a third of the validators to actually create an effective attack. So if a third of validators have been found to have cheated, they could have influenced the network. They could have switched finality. As a result of that, they get the ultimate punishment. Their entire ether is wiped out. As we said, if it's linear on that. So if, say, 10% of all active validators got slashed in your time period, then you're looking at a 30% fee. 30% penalty. So that's roughly how that looks. Now, as we said, for the beginning of phase 0, all of those values have been reduced by a factor of 3. So you won't lose 3%, you'll lose 1%. If 30% of validators have been slashed around you, then you will only lose 30% of your validators balance, etc., etc. The 36 days on the loss, obviously penalties being equivalent to rewards. We are aware that rewards are dependent on the total number of active validators. But again, that number at the top end would be basically about 1.5% of your validator. So it could be up to 1.5%. Realistically, it's likely to be a fair bit lower than that. Okay. So yeah, we're looking, obviously, if it's a simple mistake by you and the rest of the network's ticking along happily, you're looking at a loss of maybe 2.5%. If you're unfortunate or you try and do an attack on the network, obviously that can then increase significantly.
That's great. So what I'm getting from that is home users who make a mistake don't need to panic and worry about losing everything. In many cases, even in phase 0, and I think I saw a tweet by Vitalik allude to this, if you are attesting fine and 6 months down the line, let's say you reboot your computer too quickly and do a double proposal, are slashed, you might lose 1 or 2% and be ejected from the network. But even in that case, it's possible that you would have a net gain for the experience.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, the longer you can stay online, the better. There's certainly nothing that would ever gainsay that. And obviously, the more that you can attest, the better again. So yeah, obviously, the more you can. But as we've said, don't rush a fix, a change, an upgrade, a tweak in the hope of, catching that 1 or 2 epochs worth of additional attestations, because, they aren't worth anything in the long run compared to what you would A, lose by being slashed, and B, not gain by being slashed.
If I can visit that one more time. So an epoch is 6.4 minutes, and you suggested waiting at least 2 epochs before, like if you're going to shut down your machine and reboot it. So we're looking at 13 minutes there.
Yep,
Let's
30
say,
minutes outside.
okay. So if I'm a high-strung user and I want to keep uptime, but I also don't want to worry about slashing. If I set a timer on my server, my clock, and am down for 13 minutes, is that window the right time, or should it be flexed either way? Is 13 minutes the magic?
It's not magic. It's safe. I mean, it's ultimately safe. The problem is that within any single epoch, a 6.5 minute window roughly, you don't know when you are attesting. So, for example, if you attest at the very beginning of one epoch and the very end of the next, there's actually 13 minutes between your 2 attestations. If you attest at the very end of one epoch and the very beginning of the next, there's 12 seconds between your attestations. So that 13 minutes is kind of the ultimate gap in which you can assure you will miss one, but you can guarantee that you won't make a mistake and accidentally sort of do another one, do an attestation twice. So it is, it's safe. Obviously, the one caveat of that is your computer's clocks will need to be vaguely synced so that we don't end up in a situation where 13 minutes is not 13 minutes for all of the computers.
Well, I know for a lot of us who are just learning, like the rules of thumb really help. The simple wait 13 minutes, don't run your keys in 2 places. In some ways, that could summarize everything that a beginning staker might want to understand. Whereas, someone who's more interested is going to want all of the nuggets. I really look for pulling out those rules of thumb, and that 13 minutes is helpful.
And there are definitely things that you can do to reduce that time to pretty much 0 if you so desire, but they come with risks. They come with requirements of technical understanding. So, like we said, you're right. Start with a rule of thumb, make it easy on yourself, and then if you desperate to make sure you don't miss that attestation when you reboot or move servers or whatever it might be, great. Well, get involved, dig into the technical details, and understand the systems that are in place to protect you from doing that. But please do that before you try diving in and just catching that one attestation. You know what? Things like, the Beacon Explorers, they're utterly fantastic. They're brilliant. But unfortunately, when someone sees a single missed attestation in a sea of good attestations, they focus on the missed one.
Yes.
Which is, it's human nature, but it's a shame because, you know what, like we say, 90% is great, 95% is brilliant, 80% is fine. You're doing okay. And we would, in reality, expect most people to attest pretty well all of the time. These are normally only in situations where things are going wrong. Like we said, your server's blown up, or you've had a hard drive failure, or whatever it might be. My rule of thumb for that is, accept that sometimes these bad things happen and don't be desperate to catch the next attestation. Give yourself time, make sure your systems are working, make sure the old systems are down, ensure that you cannot get yourself slashed, because that is what matters. And like we said, a day later, you'll have forgotten the missed attestations. You slash yourself, you'll be thinking about it for 1.5 years.
Yeah. And I know that you're a really humble person. Did you not, your contribution is very much responsible for that validator effectiveness and the inclusion distance stuff on Beacon Chain. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so I love it. In fact, I scroll down and I look for all the zeros, and you're right. It's human nature. If I see a 1, I'm like, something's not working right.
Absolutely. But equally, as we know, the nature of the chain is going to be that, like we said, we're a peer-to-peer system. It may well be that we just can't get our attestation off to the aggregators we need to get them to in time because blah, pick your favorite reason. The Super Bowl's come on and suddenly all the networks are jammed. There's been a network outage at Google and DNS has gone mad. Whatever it might be, there's so many things that are outside of your control that can cause this, that unless you see something that's systemic, if you've got 50 attestations that are all got a distance of 6, sure, take a look. But don't worry about it. In the same way as when Netflix freezes, you generally hit back and start it again. You don't wonder what's up with your network.
Yeah.
You have the same kind of thing with this. This is very much an ongoing process rather than a set of individual events. And that kind of thought process is not only going to be a lot more relaxing for people, but it also means, like we say, they're less likely to rush and make mistakes.
Good. Yeah. And I would say the overall goal of a validator is to be good, not perfect. Seeking
Absolutely.
that perfection is just an impossible goal. So great.
Again, the network recognizes that up to a third of validators can be offline for real reasons, and it can still finalize. As a result of that, you don't have to think I need to be up with 5 nines availability or whatever that might be. And one of the things I will say is, as mainnet comes online, as we start to do a beacon chain with real ether behind it, we'll start to gather more of those metrics. And that will allow us to do comparatives, because you know what, if you're on 90% of the time and the average is 65, then you're doing fine. And this is a thing, we can stop looking at the absolute numbers and start looking at the relatives. And that will help people, I think, a lot. But obviously, as we said, when we're just looking on test nets, unfortunately, we don't have the data to be able to do that, but it is one of those things that we will, as the beacon chain goes live with real ether, and we can start to gather those numbers.
That's going to be some really exciting data. That will give us that quick ability to say, hey, you might want to look at your validator, rather than not really having that idea. So I'm very excited about that.
And it, like we said, we can start putting dollar numbers next to these things. You missed an attestation, that's 3 cents. Sorry. It's once you get that kind of thing, it'll make you feel a little bit better about it. You'll understand the context and the impact of these things, and potentially not, go and buy yourself $2,000 worth of new computer so you don't miss that again, right? It's that kind of thing that we'll start to bring through.
And the fact is, it's our game. It's not about the 3 cents. It's about winning that point, and that's how we all think. So, yeah.
Which is true, but then again, like say, we're playing with a lot of money to play that game, right? It's $15,000 to enter, and you're playing with it every time you want to gamble. So, yeah, but yeah, there's cheaper things to do if you're after that.
That's what makes it fun.
That's what makes it stressful, but okay.
Okay, so I feel like we have done an awesome job, and thank you. This is like far exceeded my hope for how we could convey this stuff. I'm always in awe of your ability to convey these messages simply. So we have covered. I was going to say we've covered the bad guy aspect, and I don't want to call slashing a bad guy, because we've covered the slashing aspect. Let's flip to the other side and look at the policemen of the network, and these are the people who will run slashers. Sure. And these really are the good guy policemen. They are protecting the network from fault. So can you tell me, how can I be a person who looks at the network and monitors for slashable events?
Sure. So there is definitely one slasher out there at the moment, which is written by Prism. The Lighthouse team are working on one. I know they've had it running internally. I'm not sure if they've released it yet. I'm not up to date on that one. But there will be a number of processes out there that people can run. So what a slasher basically does is it monitors the network. So every beacon block proposal that goes past, every attestation that goes past, the slasher will grab them, it will make a note of them, it will store them, because it's looking for 2 different blocks proposed by the same person in the same slot. It's looking for 2 attestations proposed by the same validator that actually are slashable. So it looks for all of these different things, and it's a relatively intensive process. This is worth saying. So slashing is, or running a slasher, excuse me, is realistically falling into the category of a common good. What I mean by that is that if you are running a slasher and other people are running slashers too, then the chances are that you will get nothing from it. If you're the only person in the entire network running a slasher, yep, you'll probably get the occasional thing out of it. If there's more than one of you, then the chances are that that's just not going to happen, because the reason behind that is because when you find a slashing event, so, hey, I found 2 different blocks that were proposed by the same person at the same slot, I can prove it. So you have the headers of the blocks and the signatures to say, look, I've got these 2 bits of data that prove that this person generated 2 different blocks. You have a choice. You can either hold on to it yourself or you can broadcast it out to the network. You get nothing for finding a slashing. You get a reward if you put it in a block you propose. But the reality is, again, is even on the lowest level, you know, if we're running 16,000 validators and you have 1, 5, 10, even 100, it's going to be a while until it's your turn to propose. In the meantime, the chances are that either someone else has already found the same event and they have put it in their block, or they've just broadcast it to the network. So when a slasher broadcasts a slashable event to the network, all of the beacon nodes pick it up. And so the chances are whoever is next, whoever's 12 seconds down the line in terms of generating their next block, chances are they can put that slashing event into the block. They will gain a relatively small, but okay, reward for it. But you won't. You get nothing for finding these things. You get nothing for broadcasting these things. The only way you're ever known about is because it's in the block that you proposed. So, like we said, hold on to it. You might get lucky, but realistically not. Or broadcast it. Yes, you've done it, but it's completely anonymous. No one knows about it, and some random person somewhere else will likely get your reward.
Okay, so that kind of informs a home user, a home staker. You know, I have modest hardware. I have 16 gigs of RAM on a, you know, fairly recent processor. It's really not in that person's best interest to consider running a slasher because the system requirements are so extensive, especially in memory. And the benefit or potential benefit is so wildly low that there's just no real point in it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, as always with common goods, you know, the point is you can't get to the stage where no one runs one, because if
Yes.
no one runs one, then you know, we can have people running slashing events all over the place, attacking the network, and they'll never be punished for it. So we need slashers out there, absolutely. But no, you're right. You know, if you're running on a single box and you've got, you know, 16 gig, even 32 gig of memory, you know, a half decent CPU, decent hard drive, that's brilliant to run your beacon chain because it's perfect for that. But if you add a slasher on top of that, the other problem then is your slashing activities, your slashing checks, where whenever you get a new block in, seeing if it conflicts with a previous one, that costs you CPU cycles, it costs you storage. So you know you're basically taking a little bit away from your beacon node and your validator client.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I mean if you want to run a slasher, I would certainly recommend it on a dedicated box. That way you are not in danger of impacting your beacon node or your validator client as they're doing their normal work. So that's certainly something. I think what we will end up seeing is probably a number of larger organizations or groups saying, hey, we're running a slasher. So some people are building staking pools. Maybe they're going to run a slasher there. And again, it makes sense. If you've got 1,000 validators under management and you can grab yourself a slashing event, well, yeah, you've actually now got a fair chance that you can put it into one of your blocks before anyone else broadcasts it. So that makes sense. You know, I expect, I don't know, but I expect that the Ethereum Foundation will run 1 or maybe 2 slashes in different points around the globe, because that sends the message that if you try and attack this, you will lose your funds.
Yeah.
And that's obviously an important message for them to send. Running it at home, yeah, you know, sure, if you've got a computer that you haven't got anything else to do with, but to all intents and purposes, it will lose you money because you're burning electricity. It will not make you money because, as we said, the chance of you having a slashable event that you found that you can put into a block that you propose within the reasonable time frame is minuscule. One last thing just worth mentioning is that we talked about other people running slashers. You do not need to run a slasher to receive a slashable event from the network. So slashable events in the network are passed around the same way as voluntary exits and everything else in terms of between beacon nodes on the peer-to-peer system. So as long as someone out there is running a slasher and they're broadcasting, if you're running just a beacon node and you're lucky and it's your block next, then you can propose the block with the slashing event in and gain the reward. So again, you can still get most of the benefit by just being a member of the network without having to run your own slasher. Now, equally, like we said, if you want to run your own slasher, go for it. The more, the better. Absolutely, there's always a chance that because of the way, again, with a peer-to-peer network, it's possible that the data that is sent in different places will be blocked by beacon nodes. A beacon node will see a proposal, it's already seen another one, and it might just drop the second block. So that second block never propagates through the network. And because of that, it's never treated as a slashable event because the world has only ever seen one. If there are more slashes around locally, then the chance of that slasher seeing both blocks is higher. Same for attestations and similar. So there is a benefit for the network as a whole to run more slashers, but again, the reality is that I suspect that for most home users, other people will be doing it, and they will be sufficient.
So that's really interesting. I've realized I had a machine that I was going to run a slasher, and I've decided it's probably not the best idea after what you said.
There's winter coming; it keeps you warm. It's fine, that's okay.
I was only aware previously of greedy slashing. I wasn't aware of the whole community aspect of broadcasting slashable offenses for the next proposer who will include it. And so that's new to me, and that's very interesting.
Okay. And it's obviously worth pointing out that regardless how many greedy slashers you have, you only need to have one community-minded slasher to make them all, as we said, less useful, because again, unless they're sitting behind a large percentage of the validators that are currently active, they're not going to be a huge amount of use in terms of making profit.
Sure, great. And so I think the last thing that I wanted to work out is, and you've actually helped me understand this question so much that I'm not even sure it needs a deep answer, is a lot of people are interested in earning slashing rewards. And the first thing is slashing will not be a common event. It's at least
we hope.
In a well-running network, it won't be a common event. And so it's likely as the network matures, it's even going to be less common. And the overhead of running a slasher is substantial on its own. But let's say that I did decide to run a slasher and I found a slashable event. What is my potential reward from that?
Okay, so it's something that I don't even remember. I went through it all and had a look. Again, we're looking at I think it might be like 0.5% or something like that of the balance. It's not a terrible number. I think that in fact, it's less. I might be like 0.1%. I think it's something roughly like half an ether if you catch a full node of 32 ether, and you can take roughly half an ether off that. So we're looking at again, it's very reasonable, certainly in terms of income. You just have to multiply that by the probability of you getting it. Ultimately, the single best way to make money off slashing events is just to be lucky.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's kind of.
It honestly makes me think of solo mining. Like, we're not good at thinking of probabilities in our head, but if I think about the probability of running one GPU against the Ethereum network, like the odds of me hitting a block are so wildly low that while no one's going to stop me from running it, it's probably not going to make sense in the long run.
So there is one situation where having more slashers and all that kind of thing could help as well, which is in a real attack on the network. So we spend a lot of time talking about hey, I rebooted my computer and moved my key to another computer and I slashed myself. Oops. Okay.
Yeah.
They're going to be relatively rare. We've only got 16,000 validators to start the network. Even if we had 100,000 validators in the network, maybe 1% of 1% in a given month might accidentally do something that would slash themselves. So we're looking at small numbers. If, however, there is actually an attempt to carry out an attack on the network, then suddenly we could see 30, 40% of validators put themselves in a situation where they could be slashable. Now, in that again, in that kind of situation, it's bonanza time. There's slashing events everywhere, etc., etc. So, yep, that's possible. Equally, it's entirely possible that if you're running your slasher on a low end machine, that number of events could break your slasher and it just falls over, so you never get anything out of it, right? So, it's as we said, ultimately it's a common good. Don't run one to get rich, but if you want to help the network, then please do. And like we said, it will increase the security of the network. Maybe only a small amount. Maybe it's just belt and braces approach in terms of we've got 5 different slashers running around the place and we only need one of them. But that means 4 of them can die for some reason. They can be attacked or DDoSed or fall over or just shut down out of boredom. And and there's still enough left. So certainly it does. If it's something that, and again, it's interesting to do, to start to look at some of the information to understand what slashing is, because a lot of people, again, they'll look at the network as a beast that gives them rewards, and the network is something that does what it needs to do to achieve finality. And if it has to basically bribe you by giving you money as you go along, it will do that. But the only reason it does that is because it needs you to do these attestations, right? If it just had a pure penalty system, no one would do it. And it needs to have penalties in place because otherwise it can't punish things when it goes wrong. So to balance out the penalties, it must have rewards. But that's not its purpose. This is not a this is not a DeFi, we will generate free money for you kind of system. You're getting more than anything, they're called rewards. Probably you're better off calling it compensation.
Yes,
because that's closer to what's actually happening. But understanding the internals of the Ethereum 2 network, understanding why slashes are there, how they work, what information they're gathering, how you can make them better. Obviously we're still very, very early days in the network entirely. And yes, we've had 5 years of research, but in a lot of ways the clock starts when Genesis occurs, because then there's real money on the line, and there'll be different classes of attack, there'll be different protections against them. All of these things will change. So in terms of a learning experience, so it's certainly well worth doing if you want to find yourself a little bit more involved in Ethereum 2.
Yeah, awesome. So I like to develop these rules of thumb, and I have this idea of if you're a home user and you want to run a slasher, do it if you can run it on an external machine. Would you say that's a fair rule of thumb for us to share?
For most home users, absolutely. Okay. Obviously, if your home machine is 128 gig Epic box, then fair enough, right? You've got the space. But for most people who'll build a home box, sure, the danger and concern of it potentially impacting your validator client or beacon node is probably high enough that you just don't want to be doing that.
Yeah. The challenge I run into with these rules of thumb is obviously they don't apply to everyone. That's not ever my intention. My intention is to produce these simple nuggets of here's the basic rule. And if you want to explore, like you said earlier, if you want to dig into it more, that's great. But if you just need the big picture, then if you're going to run a slasher, run it on a machine other than your validator. I think that works.
That seems reasonable.
Can I tell you something?
Go.
This is my favorite call ever. Like, I'm not kidding. I have learned. Sometimes I zone out and I don't always catch what we're talking about. Not you and I, but in calls. But I've been so enthralled. I had a basic understanding of slashing, but so much of your information is just brand new to me that I really appreciate it. Like I'm going to go and tell everyone this is my favorite. It is just a really, really jam-packed with valuable information.
It's an interesting area because, like we said, it cuts to the heart of what we're trying to do. And as we said, so many people think about slashing in terms of punishment, and it's not. It's a protection.
Yeah.
We have to, if we look at the world not from our point of view, but from the network's point of view, then it all makes a lot more sense. And like we said, the fact that it can't understand between an accidental reboot of a machine and someone starting an attack, it sort of flows into why things are the way they are. So certainly, having a certain mindset around thinking about it from the network's point of view can certainly help to understand what's going on, and again, to ensure that you can protect yourself from being slashed. I mean, obviously, the one thing we didn't cover today was the ability for someone else to slash you, which is probably worth doing very, very briefly. So the only way someone can create a slashing event on your behalf is if they have your validator private key. Any other attempt will fail because it won't be signed by you. So if it's my turn to propose a block and you propose a block, then you won't be slashed. I won't be slashed, but you'll just be ignored, because they'll be like, well, it's not your turn, it's Jim's turn, so ignore you. If, however, you can sign it on my behalf, if you've got my public key, or excuse me, my validator private key, then the network again will look at it and go, well, this appears to be from Jim, he signed it, and this one appears to be from Jim, he signed it. Okay, we're in a slashing event. So protection of validator keys is always something that's very, very important. So, again, there's lots and lots of guides out there on the internet, but especially if you're running a home server or you're running a cloud server, secure it as much as you can, shut down any ports you're not using, consider having very specific access criteria. So potentially only via the console. If you're in the cloud, you can go over the console to access it. If you want to use SSH, fine, but potentially set up a firewall so you can only access SSH from your home machine. All of these type of things. Ultimately, if someone else has access to your validated private key, it is pretty much game over. I mean, you're purely living on their good grace at that stage. If they want to slash you, they can. If they decide to, they will. If they try bribing you, saying, hey, I've got your validator private key, give me 2 Ether or I'll shut it down, you send an exit transaction and hope they're not paying attention, because once they have your private key, there is nothing you can do to stop them from creating a slashable event. So like we said, do everything you can to look after your validated private keys. There's been a lot of work put into the Launchpad to try and help you with that as well. There's a lot of work done around client systems and similar. So absolutely, do that again. If you want to spend time and energy worrying about being slashed, then your best thing to do is to spend time and energy securing your server, securing those validator private keys, so that you have as little chance as possible of them going astray.
Awesome. Yeah, that's something that I'd almost forgotten about, the potential for losing your keys and that resulting in slashing events. And I guess, as you said, that if I lost my keys today to the network somehow, the first thing that I would do is, as quickly as I could, initiate a voluntary exit, because that minimizes my exposure and takes away any power that the attacker might have, because once those keys are exited, they can never be re-entered.
So unfortunately, and again, we're looking at it from the network's point of view, there is a significant time delay between you saying you want to exit and not just having exited, but being withdrawable. And again, it's to stop someone from, I could sit here and go, okay, I'm going to write a bunch of potentially slashable actions. So I might create multiple blocks, or I might, I can build up a history of stuff that I want to push to the network. Then I can go, okay, now I'm going to exit. And then after I've exited and I'm safe, I'll push all these bad things to the network. So as a result of that, there's a time period from when you say you want to exit, there's an exit queue. But whilst you're in the exited state, you can actually move from being exited to still being slashed.
Got it.
So not until you get out of the exit area into like withdrawable are you truly done. So yeah, I mean, like we said, exit as soon as possible in that situation. And I'm afraid the answer is, hope that the attacker just isn't paying attention to the network. And then once you're withdrawable, you're safe. But until then, I'm afraid that you can still be pulled back for a slashing event.
So voluntary exit is not a solution for lost keys. It's a defense, a long-term defense. So it's not going to fix it. it's just going to ameliorate it a little bit.
It's a hopeful defense.
Hopeful defense. That's what. Yeah, great.
Yeah, like we said, you just hope that whoever the attacker is isn't paying attention to the network, and you can keep them talking for like 4 days or whatever it is,
Okay.
and until like you can get withdrawable, right?
Negotiating the ransom.
Absolutely. And if you can string that out long enough, then you're home and dry. But absolutely, no, it as we said, obviously the critical thing there is try not to have those keys exposed in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. 1 second, my boss is going nuts over here. Hey, big brother. So, Jim, let's say that people saw you for the first time today and they are wildly impressed with everything that you know. Where can they find you and find more about what you know?
So I publish a number of posts. I'm the chief technology of Attestant, which is a staking service dedicated to Ethereum 2, and we have a lot of articles up on our website. So if you go to attestant.io, and then there's a whole bunch of posts there that explain a lot about various aspects of the Ethereum 2 network. It's something that obviously we want to expand as time goes on, as more things happen, as we move to phase 1. There's a whole bunch of stuff coming down the line. But yeah, that's certainly a good place to start in terms of finding out who we are and what we do.
Great. Now, I will tell everyone that Attestant is, I'm checking it is most likely the highest quality content in any blog. And I love that you just, as you develop that blog, you focus on that incredible, just solid content and really new and fresh information. And that's kind of what you brought me today.
Fantastic. So, well, thank you.
I'm deeply appreciative. I remember the first time we met, I was like, I don't trust this guy. I saw your blog and it was fresh. And I was like, I don't know who that guy is. But I'm so glad that we've had a chance to get to know each other and that I've had a chance.
That's great stuff. You know what? It's a brilliant community. There are a huge number of people in all areas that are working away on Ethereum 2. And as I said, we're still in T-. We're not actually launched yet. And although it feels like it's almost the finish line, it's very much the start line. It's going to be a very exciting journey.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Jim. I'll talk to you later.
Excellent. Take care.